Hi friends, welcome to the NPTEL course Strategy and Technology, a practical primer. We are in week 3 with the theme of strategy execution. In this lecture, we will focus on execution. This lecture is 13th in the series. Execution, also called implementation, is often confused with undertaking certain activities. While undertaking certain activities is certainly a part of execution, true execution means carrying out of the activities in such a manner that the intended results are achieved. So carrying out of activities together with accomplishment of results is execution. Strategy can be spoken about, structure can be seen around, but it is execution that institutionalizes a business, that translates a vision into a reality. Execution is often seen as undertaking a set of activities within budgeted resources and timelines. Effective execution is more than that. It involves continuous calibration against strategy, being aware of developments in the competitive landscape. It also requires developing leaders who have execution resoluteness and environmental resilience. The leader has the primal responsibility to ensure end-to-end execution. So execution is not just carrying out of certain activities, it is a company-wide culture and company-wide phenomenon. You may have an excellent product concept, you may have an amazing design, you may have a modern manufacturing facility as well. However, if complete execution on an end-to-end basis is not achieved by the company, it could end in a failure. Nanocar is an example of that. It is a striking example of the well-executed functional parts failing to make for effective total business execution. It represents a lack of integrative thinking in the company on a vital project. Had the project been rightly executed, it would have been transformational for the group. That is the strength of execution. When we talk about execution, we have to talk about end-to-end execution. This requires an end-to-end thinking, implementation, and coordination to ensure that the strategy is translated into reality. Parts will not make a wholesome total in strategy by themselves. So the real sequence of execution or the real components of execution constitute the following. 1. A well-designed product, a well-constructed factory, a well-delivered launch, strong customer demand, product success, and a sense of satisfaction in the company. However, between well-delivered launch and customer demand, there could be gaps as well. Therefore, there is always a question mark on product success, and we have to ensure that product is successful. How does that happen? By ensuring that there is a well-executed business organization. Truly end-to-end execution requires living the product experience with the customer and directing the company value chain to deliver that. There are different views of execution. I would talk about 4 important views. 1 is goal view, 2nd is resource view, 3rd is skills view, and 4th is results view. The goal view of execution states that the goals must be clear and granular to be able to have effective execution. It says that goal clarity determines execution accountability. The resource view states that resources must be in place ahead of execution. It states that resource deployment determines execution accountability. The 3rd view, the skills view, states that skilled individuals will be best placed to understand and implement any plan. The skill set of an organization therefore determines execution accountability according to the skills view. The results view states that results must be timely and unequivocally measurable. Focus on results according to this theory determines execution accountability. All the 4 views are only partially correct by each. Effective execution by a firm requires a combination of all the 4 components of goals, resources, skills, and results. That is effective integrated execution. Execution maladies abound, particularly infrastructure projects which typically have a 5 to 10 year execution horizon and operate within the first granted budget typically suffer from such time and cost overruns. Let's take the example of airports. It takes 10 to 15 years to build an airport. Power plant, it takes 10 to 20 years. A giant oil refinery would take easily 10 to 15 years. Expressways also take 10 to 15 years. Pharmaceutical firm, which is considered one of those fast-moving industrial products, takes 5 to 8 years to culminate from the concept stage to the commercialization stage. Seaports take 10 to 15 years to build and start operations. In respect of each infrastructure project, millions of dollars, which a resource-scarce economy such as India can ill afford to lose, are at stake due to strategic and execution issues. Which is the reason why books on mega projects have been written. I have given 3 important books on dealing with mega projects. The Oxford Handbook of Mega Project Management is one such book. The other book, Mega Projects and Risk, An Anatomy of Ambition, also talks about important aspects of mega project management. Industrial mega projects is the third one. Given the critical importance of planning and executing mega projects effectively, it is important that the concepts of mega project execution are understood, assimilated, and used in implementation. At times, the fruits of development of mega projects are often challenged by the financial and non-financial risks associated with such projects. Effective execution is the key. For a leader, timely execution of a mega project is the ultimate test of the vision, strategy, structure, execution paradigm. Japan emerges as one nation which has perfected the methodology for successful execution of mega projects. This can be attributed to the national behavior culture of ownership and alignment. This plays no small part in Japan's success in implementing mega projects. There are 2 types of views again of execution. One is the factor-based view, based on goals, resources, skills, and results, which I have outlined earlier, and one which could be considered now, the behavior-based view of execution. These 2 are important. Each has respective advantages and both need to be integrated for effective execution. In the factor view, we understand there are essential components for delivery, such as men, materials, resources, skills for results. However, these tend to be transactional. In the behavior view, we take the approach that if you have an inclusive and facilitative approach, it will be motivational and value adding for execution of projects. Again, when you combine the factor view with the behavior view, you will get integrated effective execution. It is therefore necessary to understand execution from different viewpoints, align the viewpoints, and integrate them under one execution value chain. If this is the execution as generally understood, is there something beyond execution in terms of strategic execution? Yes, there is. The leader's responsibility lies in calibrating functional execution against a backdrop of business execution. That is where a well-developed corporate strategic plan that comprises functional, strategic, and execution plans counts. What are the pluses and minuses of a strategic execution approach? It views strategy as an operating guide to execution. It ensures that execution provides for strategic flexibility or course changes even while executing. It also sees strategy as an annual mechanism independent of execution and considers strategic investments as sunk costs rather than investments that can be repurposed. The last 2 points are part of strategic execution process as commonly adopted in companies, but these last 2 points also are seen as negatives, because if you see strategy merely as an annual mechanism which is independent of execution, or if you say that strategic investments are anyway sunk costs, you are not reaping the full benefits of a strategic execution approach. So the pluses of strategic execution approach must be accentuated and the negatives of strategic execution approach as commonly practiced must be minimized. So from strategy to budgets to execution must be one seamless sequence of doing things for results. Reliance Jio is one telecommunication company that has ensured that its strategy and execution of data and voice-based 4G infrastructure would be a winner. It has positioned the company as a telecommunication and digital giant capable of attracting global investors. While planning strategically the execution process, we have to narrow the options into choices. That is both science and behavior. Science obviously is reflected in terms of products, services, technologies, data, and analytics related to all of these. However, behavior is more qualitative. It is related to understanding issues, solutions, options, and choice. Asking the right questions is essential to arrive at the right strategic choices. Usual question which we ask of ourselves and others is one, but the right question could be another. What should we do is the common question whenever we try to plan and implement something. But the right question would be, what might we do? The usual question is, what do I believe? The right question would be, what would I have to believe? The usual question is, what is the right question? The right question is, what are the right questions? It is important for us to look at options from a clear value adding and decision making approach. The shift in these questions, as you can see, opens up the strategic planning process to more relevant issues, solutions, options, and choices. The possibilities based approach relies on and fosters a team's ability to inquire. Genuine inquiry is the heart and soul of any process that aims to be scientific. The strategic planning process has to consider a number of alternatives, and those alternatives must be evaluated against what should the company be doing, what should be the belief system, and what should be the right questions to be asked of the path that is to be taken. Let's look at the choices that came out of strategic options for a company. When Tata Motors looked at the organic way of growth, it did good option setting and choice making. In the 1950s, it eschewed its locomotive business and moved into medium duty vehicles, commercial vehicles. In the 1970s, it continued with its medium duty vehicles but also moved into light commercial vehicles. In the 1980s, it made the right choice of entry into multi-utility vehicles. In the 1990s again, it made another right choice of getting into passenger cars. In 2000s, it extended its light commercial vehicle journey downward and entered into the small commercial vehicles range. The light commercial vehicle range and the small commercial vehicle range have been runaway successes for Tata Motors. Similarly, the multi-utility vehicle range was also a success. In 2010s, it has entered into JLR, and in the 2020s, the company is engaged in the initiation of electric transformation of its passenger cars and later the light commercial vehicles. At every point of this history, there were options for the company to pursue, and the company chose the right options as choices and made the right investments behind those choices. Product strategy for any company is the key driver of corporate strategy. It is also a predictor of corporate success. It influences corporate success. After India liberalized in 1992, and even in the regulated years prior to that, Tata Motors made great strategic product choices. The first was, of course, moving from locomotive manufacture to commercial vehicle manufacture in 1954. The rest, as they say, is history. We can look at inorganic choices that can be made by a firm. I take the example of Sun Pharmaceuticals. It is the top-ranking pharmaceuticals company of India. It achieved rapid national and international growth through a series of well-timed aggressive acquisition moves. Some select milestones in the journey of Sun are as follows. In 1994, the company made initial public offer. In 1996, it acquired Nol Pharma API unit, which is a BASF unit. In 1997, it acquired Caraco Pharma USA, thus setting its presence in the US. In 2004, it acquired Flox Pharma, which is a cephalosporin API manufacturer. In 2010, it made a game-changing acquisition, which was Tata Pharma of USA, which had Israeli origins. In 2014, it made another game-changing acquisition, which didn't obviously go so well given the regulatory handicaps of Ranbaxy. In 2014, it acquired Ranbaxy Laboratories to emerge as the biggest Indian pharmaceutical company. The diversification of product basket to cover API products, moving into newer products in both chronic and acute therapy areas, and adding specialized businesses such as dermatological products drove significant growth for Sun. Here again, Sun had many options, but it chose those options which gave scale and scope in the appropriate manner for Sun. When you look at environment strategy together, we will understand how changes can be effected. Companies face uncertain and volatile environments. Depending on the nature of changes, companies need to effect strategic shifts. Proactive change in response to anticipated environment volatility characterizes leadership. Let's look at the change in the strategy versus change in the environment. Suppose we don't effect any strategic change and the environmental change is of low impact. Then we have companies which do not recognize the environmental change and do not make any strategic changes. Those companies are happy with the status quo. They are companies which are diffident. Let's say companies keep implementing strategic change even when the environmental change is of low intensity. These companies are explorer type of companies. They take note of even small environmental changes and make very impactful strategic shifts. Let's look at companies which do not make any strategy change even when the environmental change is of high impact. Those companies become laggards because they do not understand the environmental change and do not make even reactive strategic shifts. Forget about making proactive strategic shifts. But the leaders are those companies which make strategic changes a good part of their strategy, and when faced with high impact, they make the right kind of strategy changes. Those are leaders. These companies visualize or cause the environmental change and make proactive strategic shifts. They not only predict megatrends, they also make the megatrends happen. So if you want to look at examples, Sony Ericsson, which had to exit the mobile telephony business, was a company which was diffident. It neither recognized the nature of environmental change nor made any strategic changes. Explorer, Samsung, always wanted to explore newer area. Even though the environment was changing rapidly, it continuously expanded its exploration canvas. It introduced the edge type of smartphones, phablet kind of smartphones, the flip kind of smartphones, the flexible smartphones, the dual screen smartphone, and so on. So constant exploration is a way of life with Samsung Electronics division. BlackBerry was a clear laggard. It didn't understand the environmental change. It didn't understand that security and encryption could be anybody's job, not necessarily that of only BlackBerries. It didn't see the touchscreens coming in a big way and the QWERTY keyboard becoming obsolete. As a result, the company became laggard, not even a reactive strategic shift, and even when the impact of change was of high impact. It didn't make even reactive strategic shifts even when the impact of environmental change was high. Apple is the virtuous example where it recognized the environmental change, it predicted the mega trends, it shaped the mega trends through its design and manufacturing excellence and elegance, and effected strategic changes from time to time. Introduction of iPod, bringing in of iPhone, and bringing in of tablet, etc. So not reacting to environmental changes makes companies lose their competitiveness, and they even could become extinct. Companies which do not react even marginally to low environmental changes will be at discount to companies which are proactive and exploratory in making strategic shifts. We also can look at strategy structure change matrix. We talked about environmental change and strategic response. We can also look at strategic change and structural change. Let's look at companies which are rigid in strategy and rigid in structure. Those companies will be the losers because those are the diffident companies with rigid strategy. They become more ossified with rigid structure and become ripe candidates for exit. Again, the Windows mobile system that was used on Nokia phones is a striking example of companies which were so rigid in their strategy and structure that they couldn't cope with the environmental changes as well as the competition. Then we have companies which are flexible with strategy but are not able to change their structure. These companies are seekers. Explorer companies with flexible strategy but rigid structure do not achieve as much as they aspire to. That's why Ericsson sold off its mobile phone division to Sony, and Sony purchased Ericsson's share so that the mobile phone division can be better managed as part of its electronics business. But it couldn't really change the structure in such a way that it is as agile and as innovative as either Apple or Samsung. That's why it kept on seeking the market but could not quite make it. There could be companies which are rigid in strategy but very flexible in structure. That is, companies are willing to change but they lag in terms of strategy. Those companies still remain as laggards because flexible structures can only do a bit of the game, but they cannot accomplish the total game. BlackBerry tried to reinvent itself by removing all the handset manufacture and focusing more on enterprise security and playing on intellectual property estates. However, that did not redefine its business to the extent that it could compete on an even keel with either Apple or Samsung. So it remained a laggard. But at least by changing the structure into a more flexible unit, it could survive the onslaught of other touch-based encrypted cell phone makers. We have leaders who are having proactive strategic shifts and also having flexible organizational structures. They synchronized effective strategy and execution. Samsung and Apple come out as striking examples of leadership. Given the importance of organizational structure in enhancing or reducing the efficacy of strategy, whether flexible or rigid, this lecture considers the role and issues of organizational structure that leaders must consider. I want to take an example of Orchid Pharma, which previously was called Orchid Chemicals and Pharmaceuticals. I want to trace the essential business platform and how organizational redesign helped the company discover a new structure which could aid its strategic approach. So the vision with mission was serving patients globally with life-saving antibiotics. This strategy was become an end-to-end integrated from active pharmaceutical ingredients to finished dosage forms and with additional drug discovery capabilities. The structure was to establish world-class manufacturing and R&D infrastructure in both API and dosage forms with enabling organizational structure. The execution focus was in terms of agility on multiple fronts with cultural transformation. This was the strategic growth framework for Orchid Pharma. It embarked upon a multifaceted strategy in the 2000s to move from being a bulk drug and China export model to a full-line integrated and diversified pharma corporation with focus on USA and European Union. Between 1994 and 1999, when it commenced operations in 1994, it was a first-generation startup enterprise, which it remained till the whole part of its journey until recently. It had cephalosporin APIs in Chennai, it was exporting to China, and it also had minor domestic formulations for India. Thus, it was a small, compact company with not much of high technology. It was medium-scale technology, and marketing efforts are to less regulated markets, especially to China. Between 2000 and 2005, the company decided to implement an aggressive blueprint for expansion and diversification and also meeting the requirements of regulated markets such as USA and Europe. Antibiotic formulations were established in terms of new facilities in Chennai, cephalosporins, penicillins and carbapenems, which are the three life-saving classes of antibiotics. And to support incrementally this additional business, penicillin and penem APIs was set up as manufacturing facility in Aurangabad. We should note that cephalosporin APIs were already there in Chennai. Between 2006 and 2009, it set up new drug discovery, novel drug delivery in Chennai, and made several strategic alliances for marketing in US and Europe. This vastly expanded strategic blueprint required a proactive transformation of Orchid's organizational structure and people competencies, including a cultural transformation towards non-API, that is, towards finished dosage form technologies and work practices, and also to meet international regulatory standards. So the organizational redesign was in this form conceptually. From API manufacture in Chennai, India to export to China was a simple model. And the model was supported by API process development, API manufacture, and API export to one single market. The value chain was very simple, secure, and got for the company a strong foothold in the pharmaceutical industry. But that was not supposed to be the end. That was only seen as a base for subsequent ramp up of the company. So when you look at organization redesign, we have to see what was the starting organization that supported this simple manufacturing and export paradigm. We had the founder as the MD with the total responsibility. We had a deputy managing director who was in charge of the API site operations, and there were 3 general managers, one responsible for commercial, both purchase and sales, one responsible for finance and all other corporate functions, and one for projects, including project engineering and establishment. That was a simple organization structure which supported the simple business model as a lean operation. However, the organization required to be expanded at senior levels to develop a new business strategy and to incubate new ventures and a new strategic canopy. It was important to add senior leadership capability to envision a new future, develop a new strategy, and roll it out with incubation of new strategic ventures. That is when I came in as a deputy managing director. I was a director on the board of the company from the inception, albeit in a non-whole-time capacity, but I came in as full-time as deputy managing director when we wanted to transform this company from this simple business model to a more challenging but more rewarding universal business model. Then we had created a new division for domestic formulations. We still had head commercial, head finance, and head projects undertaking many of the responsibilities. Creation of new leadership nucleus resulted in the development of a new strategic blueprint that required massive expansion of the strategic canvas, developing the company into an integrated and diversified global pharmaceutical corporation operating in regulated markets and less regulated markets. We call them RMs and LRMs respectively. Strategy was planned out as a set of programs so that the organization could feel the strategy in terms of projects that are live, that are result oriented, and that can be felt and be a part of. The project mode drove everything in strategy. Each step of the strategy required raising of finances, while strategic alliances provided additional cash flows. So we could envisage 10 projects to implement this strategy. The first was to broaden the cephalosporin API range, oral and sterile, and expand capacities. The second was to establish R&D infrastructure to support product diversification. The third was to establish oral and sterile cephalosporin finished dosage forms facility. The fourth was focused on establishing oral and sterile penicillin and carbapenem API facility that was first acquired and then upgraded and expanded. Establishment of sterile penicillin and carbapenem finished dosage forms facility, establishing oral non-antibiotics API facility, establishing oral non-antibiotics dosage forms facility, establishing formulation R&D and drug discovery, medchem and biology facilities, executing strategic alliances with US, EU, generic and MNC pharma companies, establishing subsidiaries in US, EU and Japan. This strategy, which had such important key projects with specific milestones, resulted in an amazing integration and diversification, but with a heavy debt burden as well. As a first generation enterprise, there was only this much money that could be put in by the promoter. The rest had to be taken as debt, and the debt overhang became heavy over the time. There were 4 strategic drivers for the mammoth expansion and diversification envisaged by the company. It was considered ambitious and even adventurous for a first generation enterprise, And this diversification was focused on sterile injectable products which had proprietary technologies and which involved establishment of high investment, high technology facilities. The strategy thus involved creating entry barriers in terms of these competencies of the organization. So the four pillars of this strategy were as follows. One, forward integration into formulations or finished dosage forms so that higher value can be captured by supplying medicines directly to patients rather than supplying just the bulk drugs for someone else to make the medicines. Second, diversification into regulated markets, which not only had higher quality standards, but also were rewarding higher quality products with higher prices. It also involved diversification into new drug discovery and novel drug delivery, that is, into the innovation stage of a pharmaceutical company, which is the ultimate goal for any pharmaceutical company, and world-class R&D and manufacturing facilities with US FDA approvals. To be able to undertake the above transformation, the company needed to create new value chains with multiple core competencies in the organization. To convert this strategic canvas into execution reality, the company needed to extend the existing API value chain and create new value chains. API had R&D, process development, technology transfer, manufacturing, and marketing as the main drivers. It was focused on less regulated markets, but when I entered, I moved it to regulated markets as well. Two new value chains relating to formulations and drug discovery were created on a greenfield basis. Started with R&D, clinical studies, technology transfer, manufacturing, and marketing, and simultaneously we looked at both regulated markets and less regulated markets. The value chain of drug discovery was established, comprising medicinal chemistry, biology, preclinical, clinical, and marketing was done to both big pharma and generic companies. What used to be a simple three-step API value chain was thus expanded in just 5 years to 3 distinct value chains that covered API, dosage forms, and drug discovery, and also interconnected each of these seamlessly. This required building up of multiple core competencies which were beyond the reach of even much larger pharmaceutical companies of that time. To be able to do that, that is, to convert the strategic value chains into operational reality, the company built up multiple core competencies and undertook multiple strategic initiatives, which, as I said, even big companies would not dare to undertake at that point of time. To be able to do that, we brought in expert leaders in formulation and drug discovery domains. We built up world-class competencies across value chains. We created SBU structure so that there was appropriate divisionalization, empowerment, and accountability. And these were created for API, dosage forms, drug discovery, and also a corporate center to seamlessly integrate all the existing and new businesses. We had targets of the highest order. We sought approvals by US FDA, UK MHRA, and Japanese PDMA, which are gold standards in international regulatory approvals. We didn't want to be ignorant of what happens in those markets. So at some cost, we set up subsidiaries in the US, European Union, and Japan, which are wholly owned subsidiaries. And underlying and connecting all of this was our aspiration to be one-stop shop for life-saving antibiotics. If somebody wanted to have life-saving antibiotics, one need not have looked beyond Orchid to be able to get those kinds of life-saving antibiotics. The focus was on R&D and manufacturing, and marketing was done in alliances with global generics and big pharma, and there was focus on sterile antibiotic API and dosage forms. To be able to support this, world-class facilities were constructed and operated with FDA approvals for state-of-the-art R&D and manufacturing. The new competencies enriched the new organizational design, and the transformed organization transformed the business as envisaged. You can see the kind of change that has entered in the organization with the strategy. To provide the necessary growth impetus and operating economy within the one firm canopy, the company implemented the SBU structure. This paid rich dividends. If you recall the earlier slide, an MD, a deputy MD, and 3 general managers. But you see the organization that was expanded and brought in with upgraded talent to meet the new strategic blueprint. Managing Director continued to focus on API because that was his core competence and core passion. So two sites were there supplying API. There was an R&D API. Within each site we had process R&D and operations. I came in as the new Deputy Managing Director to drive strategic planning as also incubate all the new ventures. So we had a CEO for pharmaceuticals, that is formulations, and we had a Chief Scientific Officer for drug discovery. The formulations was again an end-to-end business connecting R&D, regulated market sites, and also less regulated market sites. Drug discovery had its own value chain, starting from laboratory discovery of new compounds to medicinal chemistry synthesis and screening in biological models, both in vitro and in vivo. The commercial aspects themselves were expanded to include API commercial, finance, API R&D. Commercial was split into API purchase and API sale, whereas finance supported secretarial and other activities. As DMD, I looked after the corporate center and the overseas subsidiaries. Various functions such as strategy, legal, IT, HR, and other functions reported to me, whereas overseas subsidiaries like USA subsidiary, US subsidiary, and Japan subsidiary reported to me. Close collaboration between MD and DMD and the empowerment of DMD, CEO, and CSO helped the company accomplish this strategic transformation in record time. And this transformation had few parallels in the pharmaceutical industry. So this is how strategy changes the outlook for the company in terms of plan. But it is the structure that is implemented gives rise to execution of strategy and accomplishment of results. So the connection between vision, mission, objectives, values, strategy of the company, the structural transformation of the company, and therefore business transformation through execution of strategy is very evident through the case example which I have outlined. So with this execution as a specific topic is covered in this lecture, we will meet again to consider other aspects. Thank you.